it's never the same if they're not listening. If somebody's not listening to you, well, let's say they are listening to you. Their eyes are watching you, and you know that their heart is listening to you. And it allows you to open up. You actually say things. It's almost like they're drawing it out of you, lovingly. It can happen with a good therapist. It can also happen with your beloved. It can happen between young people resting their heads on the pillow, gazing into each other's eyes, whispering their secrets. The sharing of something, it's to do with more than the content. It's to do with the process, the kind of way that you're being drawn out. It's almost like what you're saying is itself a metaphor for a deeper sense of connection with the other person. And when they're listening to you, they draw it out of you. And if they stop listening, you'll notice that you lose your flow. You lose your kind of surplus energy where it's really emotionally coming out. And then you see them looking at their watch or looking at their phone or, moving around the room to get the mug of tea. And it's like, you don't share as strongly now as you were because you feel they're not listening. It's not a judgment. You're not judging them, but it's just that sharing something, when you speak words, they live in a context, and the context is the relationship between two people. And what I try and make happen in this podcast is that the words are not necessarily the truth in the same way as information or knowledge is. I'm always fearful that people will think I know something, or that I'm intelligent, or that I'm a philosopher or a therapist or something, or a teacher, and I'm not. I'm really, really not. I'm in a space of complete personal bewilderment. I sit here in my studio, this lovely little room in Donegal, and I speak to you as if you were here. And I share with you with an enthusiasm that comes from that feeling that you're listening, that you're present. And I tell you how confused I am, what little I know. And so the words that I use to you I always put them down, that they're not the kind of truth you will get in a book of philosophy or psychology. They're just me sharing what is essentially my story. And my story this morning, and this is the 9th of February in 2024. It'll never come again. Today will never come again. Tomorrow will be also unique. It's like the eternal present that we're in, this being here now, is magnificent because it never ends. But it's also magnificent because every moment of it is utterly unique. So there's no point in saying that the 9th of February is much the same as the 10th. No, the 10th is like completely different month, completely different year, because it's the same eternal moment of uniqueness. And there's a date coming up, and this is just sharing who I am this morning now, because I'm here in my studio. I'm alone in this lovely wilderness, but when I turn on the radio or the television or YouTube during this week, it's so terrible when a war comes as close as the war in the Middle East, the war in Gaza has come to us. It's very hard to avoid it. And I suppose it's just very hard to avoid the anger and the rage, and it's all valid. Everything that's said about it is valid. And yet, it reminds me, to be honest, of times that I lived in Fermanagh. And there was trouble in Fermanagh when I was there. And people got very angry. There was violence. There were people killed. There were people maimed. There were people ended up in hospital for decades. For decades. And you want politics to create a language of communication that is better than tearing people's limbs apart. And to a great extent that happened in the North. And it's such a joy for me, like when I go back to places that I used to live in Fermanagh, and I go back now, and it's like a different world because there isn't the same fear, rage, anger, terror, and there isn't the same proximity to the possibility that, you know, another person will be blown to bits today or shot. So all it leaves me with, the experiences that I had in Fermanagh in the 80s, the thing it left me with was not a judgment of violence, not a kind of a declaration that violence is insane, but a kind of an ache in my heart for peace. You know, I want to be in safe places, and I want those I love to be in safe places, and I want all the strangers in the world that I don't know, I would wish them to be in safe places. And ultimately, you go over the threshold then where you're able to say, I want my enemies to be in safe places. And I find that when I do that, or when I used to do that in the 80s, because politics was all around me, and I think I succeeded in not being on any side. Not because I was afraid to say, what's morally right or wrong, but because I felt there was a deeper moral position. And that was the position that people take when they proclaim peace as a non-violence, as an absence of violence. And that's a kind of a huge well that you drill down into in your own heart, the absence of violence, because immediately you find that you're using violent language, or that you're emotionally violent. It could be the way that you make a cup of tea and you fling things around in the kitchen in a kind of a rage. It's anger, really, I suppose. And I found anger in myself at that time. So there was this huge, big cataclysm of war going on around me. But inside me there was a kind of an echo of it as well. And I really tried to find a peace. And one of the days that I found that peace was in 1984, on February the 11th. And that's 40 years ago on this Sunday. The reason was arbitrary. It was the feast of Our Lady of Lourdes on the and like I didn't have any great devotion to Mary, the Mother of Lourdes, the Mary in Lourdes that appeared to Bernadette. I didn't have any big deal there, But I did always have a sense of the Mother. I've always had a sense that the inadequacies in my life at a human level, which are just the same as yours now, they're no different. There's nothing unique about feeling inadequate, because it's the way we go through life. We're never quite satisfied, and we want complete love, complete affection, and even sometimes, the way people say you marry your mother, because your mother is this, all-enveloping, loving creature for 9 months, giving you birth, and then she nurses you and nurtures you for 2 or 3 years, and you gradually grow up and grow away from her, but you're kind of left with a nostalgia, or a kind of a memory of the perfect, secure womb. And in some sense, you meet another person, a woman, if you're a man, or a man if... I won't go there, but just from my point of view, looking for that motherly thing, you meet somebody else and you find you fall in love with them because they have traits that remind you of your mother without you being conscious of it. It's okay. Because in that template of seeking the mother, it would seem to me that the ultimate mother, the ultimate archetype, if you like, is the presence of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And that's in my tradition. It's not... I noticed when I went into Buddhist practice how powerful Tara practice was in the evenings. Always in the evening in Jampaling, to this day they do Tara practice. If you ever went to Jampaling, you'd be sharing that puja, that little prayer service in the evenings at 7 o'clock. Everybody gathers in the prayer room and they say these beautiful prayers visualizing the female Buddha, the perfect luminous female Buddha, and all your hopes and aspirations are laid before this wonderful presence, and it's a feminine female presence. So I used to think it was amazing how what we did as children when we would be making a May altar or saying prayers to the Virgin Mary, and here we were as adults in middle age in a Tibetan Buddhist center. We were really doing the same thing, and it had the same efficacy for me. It had the same wonderful sense of holding me. I felt lifted up and held when I did a prayer to the Tara Buddha, the white Buddha, the female Buddha. When I said the Tara practice, and you can get the Tara practice online anywhere, just Google it, you'll find it. There's a green Tara, there's a white Tara. What's the really big tradition in Tibet, and what I experienced, was white Tara. White Tara practice. Very beautiful. And I found it efficacious. I found it like... Here's the thing about all my faith in the religion. It comes down to a distinction between a psychological view of the world and what I would call a faith experience of the world. The psychological view, it was summed up I can't think of the name, but some very, very important psychiatrist in the 20th century, some leading light, said that all the gods and everything about the God comes out of your brain, out of your mind. So it was like you could deal with how we relate to God the same way as you might deal with any other aspect of the psyche. And I think that's a fundamental difference between psychology and faith. Faith is always going over a threshold where you're saying, let's say with the dynamic of Mary or Christ or the Buddha or any saint, what I'm saying to myself, the way I'm understanding myself sitting in this room when I invoke the presence of Mary, is that that's not contingent on my brain or psyche or mind. That in some way I am penetrating an alternative level of reality. That there is, beyond the veil of my sense of consciousness, there is another, a different source, which is the foundation of everything and to which I'm relating. And so in that sense, I am speaking to Mary, or I believe that she is listening. And as I say, I'm not a theologian, but I can certainly say that in some sense, that Mary is part of whatever it is, the unified singularity of the cosmos has a source, has a dimension of rootedness that is beginningless, endless, and its characterization, if I try and examine the cosmos like it's a fingerprint, its characterization is of love. Everything is pushing towards love. And that's what I feel in any moment of my life, no matter how terrible it is, no matter how terrible the pain. But it's hard to think of those things when you're in a war situation. It's hard to think of those when you're in a bed in a hospital, when you're suffering serious illness. You might be suffering terrible illness, you might be in a war situation. It's very hard to think about the nice, beautiful ideas of God's presence. But yet it can be consoling because where you are is where you are anyway. So it's not like, I always remember what was his name? Is his name Stephen Fry, a fine intellectual and wonderful artist. I mean, these guys are great. It's not for me to be criticizing them, right? But at the same time, famous moment with Gay Byrne where he's talking about, is there a God? And he says, how could there be a God when people are suffering with all the terrible diseases they have? And if I ever met God, I'd say, how dare you let these people suffer? Okay, but the suffering in the world is not diminished if there is no God. If you think of Gaza, if you think of Fermanagh when I lived in it, if you think of the pornography of killing, the pornography of dismembering a body. It doesn't get any better because you come to the conclusion that there is no God, that there is no meaning. It would seem to me, worse, because you're abandoning yourself to that completely contemptible energy of destruction and violence. And in those situations, you can see where in all religions there is a sense where people tend towards the idea that God is actually in the suffering. God is suffering with us in the suffering. And the child that is blind, or the child that is wounded or maimed, is not without God. The child is God. The child is the manifestation of God in a suffering that is ongoing compassionately because God is with us. And that's what what's creating the woundedness, the dismemberment of the child is actually an energy that rejects God and forces and pushes our own human agendas. In that sense, there is no position in war that is right. There is no position, because they are all pushing our own agendas. And it may be very, very difficult to find a way out of war. And maybe it's only for those who are in it that can do it. But in some way we are also aligned to the darkest energy of war. When we're angry, I am aligning myself with the darkest energy, not with a point of view, because points of view are not what is the fundamental truth of reality. The point of view is only your point of view for a passing moment, and tomorrow you'll have a different view. But when I align myself with anger, even if it's only anger at the coffee cup or the tea cup that I'm making the tea, and even if it's only the way that I fling the tea bag into the sink like with rage, because I'm raging about something, the postman didn't bring my parcel yesterday, I'm raging. We can be angry about so little, so small little things, but every moment of it we're aligning with the darkest energy in the cosmos, which is not nice. I kill a spider, I kill an insect, it's not nice. And that brings you to this sense of non-violence. Non-violence not as a political position, not as a position of, taking sides in a conflict, but in some sense finding in myself where the anger is, and using, as my teacher would say, antidotes to dissolve the anger. And then one of the great antidotes is religion. To embrace the sense, let's say, of Mary, Queen of Heaven, to embrace her presence. Like Mary, the Queen of Heaven, we talk about the Queen of Heaven, right? But it's really interesting, because it's only when I speak Irish and I'm talking to a neighbour and they're talking about some worry they have, or somebody's in hospital, and I've heard them use the word, king, to refer to God. May the king bless them. We wouldn't say it in English. We'd think, what are you talking about? Talking about King Charles or something. But no, they... Not a lot, but you can see that it was quite a pattern of language in Irish. That the king might bless you, that the king might save you. Obviously, it comes from a time when the template of king and kingdom was the only one there was to express that sense of God's presence in your heart. And it dawned on me in that moment, the first time I heard people using it here in Donegal, it dawned on me that, well, that meant that the Queen of Heaven, was very much like the partner of the King. You can see how Mary, the mother of Jesus, the mother of God, she's brought into a position of like almost one with God, almost like the feminine dimension of God. And when you go there, when you go into that place where, you know, there's a little room in your heart that you go into and you're present in that room, and it's like you're meditating, you're present, you're conscious, you're calmly abiding, and then in some moment of that stillness, it's like you're listening. It's like you're feeling somebody's speaking to you in the silence, just by being present. And you're feeling it like exactly the same as you might have felt when you're talking to somebody and they're eyeballing you and they're smiling at you and they're listening to you, and it's allowing the words to flow out of you, to share. It's like if you get a therapist like that, you've got a wonderful gift. If you've got a lover, a beloved, a child, a father, a mother, anybody, a friend, anybody a stranger sometimes can be the one that you meet and you start talking to on a pilgrimage or in a cafe or in a holiday. And you just get this glow that somebody is listening to you. And it draws out of you sometimes things that you never realized, things that you had never articulated, but you can articulate them when there's somebody listening. I think that's one of the greatest, most essential gifts of a loving relationship, marriage, a durable relationship, whatever you want. To have somebody who is with you. I felt it myself on a severe occasion I often mention, when I went into depression after physical illness, and I found myself in a very black space. And it was like then I experienced love, because my family, my partner, my beloved, I had this experience of presence. They were simply there. Even sometimes in the next room, even sometimes when they were talking between themselves, I would hear, laughter from the kitchen. And the consolation of that there was this presence around me to lead me out of my own darkness. And I believe that it's the same context you're talking about when you talk about faith in a God, whether it be whatever mentor deity that you connect with, whether it be Jesus or a saint or Mary or Buddha or Moses or Abraham. It's that sense that, as they say in Islam, God is closer to you than you are to yourself. They say God is closer to you than your own jugular. So you must allow your stillness and your presence to really go into a room of stillness and to find that space of meditation and calm abiding. And then to awaken in that space, in that breathing, in that stillness, to awaken in that to the realization that there is another who is present with you. And you know something? After that, you will be led wherever is right for you. You will be led. You're listening, and I believe that you will be led. And 40 years ago, on this weekend, on the 11th of February, 40 years ago, I was conflicted about being in the active ministry as a priest. I was conflicted about living in Fermanagh. I was conflicted about politics and career and sexuality and writing and just everything. I was a 30-year-old or 28, 29. No, I was 30, but I was deeply conflicted. And I said, okay, on this day, it's a feast of Mary, it's a feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, I'm going to lay my life down in her arms. I'm going to lay my troubles down. I'm going to just release myself from all the anxiety of wondering what I should be doing with my life. And I'm going to ask her just to be present with me as a mother would be lovingly with her child. And I remember that day to this very day, because it changed my life. In the following 12 months, the politics got worse, the violence got intense. I came to a crisis about where I should be in life. But everything unfolded simply, wonderfully, magically. I believe because I had laid down my life in that moment and asked for help, believing. Not that the dynamics of that were kind of dependent or contingent on my psyche or my mind or the way my brain works. But because there was another person involved. So when you get there, when you get to that position, I think that's the beginning of real non-violence. You know, that in every moment, rather than clench your fist or point the finger or announce who you are in your own importance, that in some way you let go, you point at nothing, you open your hand, you open your heart, and you say, I don't know where I'm going and I don't know who I am, but I will be led. Lead me. Lead me in the way of your truth. Lead me in the path of your truth. There's so much in the Psalms about being led. And there's so much, to be honest, in this podcast about that sense of presence. That sense of me here, talking to you with a total and firm conviction that you're present. Because that's the funny thing, that if we take a sense of God's presence in your life, if you find it, you don't have, okay, you can be sometimes you're blessed if you have routines and rituals that bring you into the presence of God. You might have a church beside you, you might have a temple beside you, or a mosque, or you might have regular ways that you pray with your family, but you might not. We live in a world now where, in some sense, every one of us needs to carry a whole monastery inside in your heart. You need to be your own community. You need to use also, I use the virtual connections that I can get with real monasteries. For example, the nuns of Kylemore Abbey, they're still there, and you can see them and share and pray with them online by just Googling their website. The same is true for the monks of Glenstall. The same is true for a little convent Benedictine sisters down in Waterford called Glencairn. And of course there's one that I use all the time, and that's the monastery or the convent of St. Elizabeth in Minsk, in Belarus. And I click on that sometimes. I don't like, do it in a routine way like on a Sunday morning or something, but because I'd follow them on YouTube and I get notifications. I'd be aware sometimes when a big festival comes. There was one recently, the circumcision of Jesus, what we call the presentation of Jesus in the temple from a Western point of view, but it's that the baby Jesus been brought into the temple to be, blessed and received and ritually welcomed into the tradition of faith that is Judaism. And you always have to think of Judaism and Christianity. It's really like the one river. It's the famous place where the old man Simeon sees him coming in and says, "At last, Almighty Father, you give leave to your servant to go in peace. For my eyes have seen the salvation you have prepared for your people, a light to enlighten the Gentiles." The old man looking at the wee baby. You might have something like that helps. It helps me, when I go to those websites. I go to a website like, I don't do it often. I do St. Elizabeth's Convent, that's where I go. But just for 10 minutes or 5 minutes sometimes when they're doing a live broadcast of a divine service or an all-night vigil, and you just tune into it for 5 minutes. And it's not that I have some sort of prayerful moment in that moment. I'm just looking at a screen, watching what's going on. But I'm absorbing it into my heart as a kind of reality. I know they're there. It's like a FaceTime and Skype, they always bring the person more real into your life, not when they're actually on the screen, but it's days afterwards. It's like I was talking to, let's say, somebody in my family yesterday, and I was on a screen and we were just talking ordinary mundane things, but when I wake up this morning, I don't feel as remote from her as I might if I didn't have that screen. And it's the same with the sites that you can find the Mass on. I was at a Mass recently. I was at a funeral in Cavan in the cathedral, and I realised that it was being live streamed, and after that, the following Sunday, I checked, and it was amazing. I was lying in bed. And Cavan Cathedral is where I was ordained a priest. Cavan Cathedral is where I was baptised. It's one of those places. There's a huge, strong connection with my soul and my heart. Massive. And there I was looking at it. Looking at the steps up to the altar and the carpet on the steps and the brass, rods that hold the carpet tight down onto the steps. And I was remembering when I was an altar boy, kneeling beside those big brass rods. And here I was looking at them on a screen, and the powerful help that gives you to make that visual connection. I've sometimes done it. There's an icon of the Black Madonna, it's called, in Częstochowa. Google the Black Madonna, you'll find the monastery. The monastery is Jasna. I think I pronounced that wrong probably, but Jasna. And again, there's always a live stream of the sanctuary where the icon is. So you can tune in, and at times where there's maybe mass going on, but you can tune in when there's nobody there at like 10 o'clock at night. And you get a live stream image of that icon of Mary, the Mother of God. Live stream. You might see somebody coming and, dusting a chair or picking up a book that's on the floor, tidying the place up. And being present to that even on screen. I don't think it does anything powerful when you're watching it on the screen, but it's the way that the images, you carry them in your heart the following day, and you're walking around deeply aware of the presence, even though it's thousands of miles away. I can nearly look out the window and feel way over there on the other side of Europe, there is an icon, and there are people kneeling at this moment before it. So all that sense of, I suppose, presence is what I try and fit into this moment of faith with you. That I say thank you for being here because it's the same presence. If there's a presence of the divine in Jasna, then it's the same presence that is everywhere, because all things are just one thing. And it's the same presence that you can experience in your heart, in this moment, if you go into that room and listen. And trust that, I suppose, you're not alone in that moment. You're not just experiencing the, matrix of deity as the workings out of your own psyche. You're not in a closed space. You are in this open space where there is another, what they'd say, ontological presence. A presence that's fundamentality is different completely to who you are. And yet it is the very thing that begets you, that makes you, that sustains you, not just your breath with oxygen, but your consciousness. So you are not autonomous. You are contingent. And that would be really what Martin Buber, this great philosopher, he was a Jewish philosopher. And he underpins a lot of what I talk about. A soul is never sick alone, says he. A soul is never sick alone. And he says in another place, I'm quoting now from a book, the wounds of the order of being can be healed in infinitely many other places than those at which they were inflicted. Now, I'll read it again. The wounds of the order of being can be healed in infinitely many other places than those at which they were inflicted. The way that works for me is this. Supposing I had a terrible psychic wound that maybe I picked up through the trauma of war in Fermanagh, let's say. I don't necessarily have to go back to Fermanagh to heal that. And I don't have to go back to the past. And I don't have to unravel any of the complex political, emotional webs that I was caught in. I could go arbitrarily to, let's say, St. Catherine's Well in Killybegs or St. Gobnet's Well in Ballyvourney, in Coolay. I could choose to go there and say this will be a healing. And I would be able to find in that place complete healing. It would be a pilgrimage, but it would also be again an act of faith that the one who loves me, that the presence of the Godhead in whatever religion it manifests for me, that this loving presence is alive today, can heal today with an embrace. And again, sometimes it happens with a therapist or with a lover, who you might be talking about your past. You might be talking about things that happened you many years ago. And you realize that the very fact that you're speaking, the very fact that somebody is listening and they're drawing out of you your pain, well, you could end up in that moment just embracing that person, that listener, that therapist, that lover. And they would say to you, I'm holding you in this moment. And you'd know they were. And you find your healing, you find your release. So you find it in the pilgrimage to the Holy Well or to some favourite church or walking the Camino, going to a Buddhist center. You make a focus and you go there and you say your prayers and you will be healed. You go to a therapist and you allow the loving presence. You go to your beloved and you allow the loving presence to enfold you with tenderness, and you will be healed. The faith in God has to be faith in things that are said of God. You know, like in the Old Testament, how beautiful it says, my plans for you are for peace. Always. I think it's in Isaiah, great prophet, I don't know, but my plans for you are for peace. So what's ahead of you today? What's ahead of me? You can answer that question at a surface level. I have a letter to post. I have to go in and get my hair cut. There's an awful lot of old stuff. You might have things ahead of you like, I don't know, maybe a hospital examination, in an operation in a hospital. You may have difficulties physically that create a full day for you. You may have grief in your heart. You may have lost someone. You may just be lonely and want to make a cup of tea and have no milk. You may be waiting for a home help to come. You may be terrified of being bullied in your job. There's so many things ahead of us, but at another level, in that center of your being, in your heart, the Lord says, my plan for you is for peace. In all this storm I will give you peace. In all this raging storm, you're in your little boat and you're terrified, but listen, I may be sleeping, the Lord says, but I'm here. There will be peace. There will be peace in our hearts. And that will contribute to peace at a political level and at the level that stops and ends wars. And that's where I think, the idea of ahimsa, non-violence, begins and ends in life, in the face of war. It can never be in the argument. It can never be in resolving the argument, even though the argument must be resolved and righteousness must find its space. But the pathway towards it is always like, in my heart, am I dissolving the anger with antidotes and finding and listening to and hearing God's peace in my heart? Well, I'm going to try. I'm going to try today, and I'll fail, and tomorrow I'll fail better. And we keep going, being present. What can I say to you? You are in this moment now. You are present. I'll slip away. I'll turn off the microphone. The podcast will end. I'll end with the words that I usually do. Thank you for being here. But then just when I'm gone, you will still be present. You feel that gratefulness just of being present. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.